If I only had 1 minute for this presentation, I would say two things. First, innovation needs evaluation for a simple reason. I mean, new is not always good, and good is not always new. And in a way, this is what the president of the ADB said this morning. There are some basic things about development which innovation does not capture. Evaluation itself needs innovation for a simple reason, because the world has changed and evaluation has not changed fast enough. There is nothing wrong with innovation, but it has a dark side. Innovation essentially is creative destruction. I mean, innovation can be a public good, but it can also be a public bad. A lot of the financial innovations, were behind the 2008 financial crisis. In addition to that, the enabling environment for innovation needs evaluation. And one doesn't hear too much about that. But the fact of the matter is that patents are turning essentially a public good into a private good. Patents are monopolies, basically. Patents freeze innovation and delay the advance of new technologies. When you evaluate innovation, you have to do it at two levels, at the global level as well as at the country level. The fact of the matter is that the quality of the global environment, it is whether you have an open trade system or not, or free movement of capital, that will give you high rewards for innovation. However, the risks are much greater if the country does not have the adaptive capacity to absorb innovation, and which is why special and differential treatment is important. The second part of the argument, which at evaluation itself needs innovation. And let's start at the project level. The project is the workhorse of the development business. What can we do specifically to improve the quality of project evaluation in terms of innovation? First of all, I would argue that we should put the Paris Declaration criteria as an integral part of the evaluation criteria, because the benefits of a project are only valid at the country level. And therefore, to avoid the macro-micro disconnect, you really do need to have a sense of implementing the Paris Declaration, ownership, alignment, harmonization, results orientation, mutual accountability. All of these things are not necessarily built into projects today. We should not confuse innovation as the end. It's simply an output, because the ultimate outcome is essentially the sustainable development goals. Innovation in itself, despite all the fads and the rhetoric, should not be viewed as an end in itself. The end, the inclusive development is the goal. 75% of the poor people are in middle-income countries today, which really means, and these countries have the resource to deal with poverty, which means that development evaluation has got to focus on capacity building in countries. That is where the high leverage is. It is not simply an add-on to what independent evaluation departments do. It should come at the core of what development evaluation departments do, because in the end, it's what middle-income countries, how they evaluate their own programs, which will make a difference to the poor of the world.
I'll begin with defining innovation. The way I would look at it is better solutions to meet existing or new challenges at lower cost. A simple enough definition. And what I'll do is try and illustrate this with an example. We have Ebola increasing very quickly in West Africa. Let's imagine that there is a company which actually invents or finds or discovers a drug which can take care of Ebola and cure the patients. This I would call the technological component of innovation. So now we have a drug. Now the second part comes in, and we say, how can we, as development professionals, identify getting this drug to the right people? You could look at approaches, and that approach itself, how we get to the patients who need it, could be considered innovative. The third part becomes institutional, which I would align with implementation. You now have a drug, you know where it has to go, and now you need to take this drug to the people who need it. And that would be your institutional mechanisms necessary to reach that. So in sum, the way I would look at defining innovation is looking at it either at a technological level or an approach level or an institutional level. And any one of these three or a combination of those would work out very well from a development perspective. Let's look at, do evaluations encourage innovation? IFAD instituted a very explicit innovation component in its policy. It has an innovation policy, and it went forward and said, we are going to ensure that focusing on rural poverty, we use innovative ways in reducing and addressing this challenge. Evaluation came in later, an evaluation of how well that policy of innovation had been implemented. So the two worked together. The overall direction was provided by management, which is the leadership part, and the evaluation component went forward and helped it along. So the way I would liken this is to say, as evaluators, we do not create products, we help make the products better by telling them what is working, what is not working, and so on. Keeping in mind that we as agencies are fairly independent, we have a great deal of flexibility to bring about innovation in evaluation. Unfortunately, I would submit that we haven't done that either. There is a huge amount of things that we could be doing at a methodological level, at a technological level, and so on. One of the techniques that has been used, and we should be using that much more, is to have little surveys on cell phones which can be filled in by civil society and simply give them a small amount of money, mechanisms which we can use innovatively to get the basic data which we desperately need for doing evaluations.
To begin with, please allow me to introduce the text of classic literature on innovation and knowledge management. Peter Drucker wrote, "Purposeful, systematic innovation begins with analysis of source of new opportunities." And Ikujiro Nonaka defined the business process of the knowledge-creating company whose sole business is continuous innovation. To promote knowledge management, lessons learned from evaluation should be classified, analyzed, then appropriately communicated to the project departments. Lessons learned should be processed into highly versatile and practical knowledge, then authorized for accumulation. Verify the use of effectiveness of the lesson learned in project PDCA cycle and feedback the result. The semantic evaluation analyzed the constraint of JICA's utilization of lesson learned. It points out that important lessons learned has not authorized and has not applied in standardized practices. As a result, similar lessons are repeatedly produced just to create same mistakes, and same countermeasures are reinvented. I think this is a big risk factor for the JICA's management. The evaluation pointed out 5 issues that causes insufficient use of lesson learned: practical use of knowledge management, access to the information, solution, user motivation, and feedback from the user. I suspect evaluation department of any organization may find same challenges. The process of knowledge management is indispensable for knowledge creation in JICA, and it is hoped that new knowledge leads to innovation. To be innovative, evaluation should be positioned as an essential part of knowledge management. Through continuous process of knowledge management in PDCA cycle, lesson learned from evaluation can sure to lead to the innovation.
Evaluation is a relatively simple thing. You don't need to have a view on whether this project was cutting edge or whether it was plain vanilla to be able to answer the question, did it work relative to what it set out to do? That's an innovation neutral kind of question. And it feels to me that's the question primarily evaluators ought to be asking. To me, it's very difficult to see how or why well-done evaluation would either penalize or reward any particular type of project design, whether it was yesterday's design or a highly creative new design. Let me suggest a couple of ways, though, and I think there may be important ways in which evaluation can contribute to better and more innovation in the institutional context within which it operates. First, it's establishing standards of evaluability. What are the data that we expect to see? What are the metrics that we're using? The second is, and this is critical, is to capture the lines of causality, or the so-called theory of change, very clearly in the project design. What is it that you expect your activities or your inputs to cause to happen that will lead to some desirable result? Third point is, I believe that the evaluation functions in all these institutions could significantly deepen their role in internal learning and knowledge generation. It's actually a relatively recent feature of evaluation that evaluators even regarded themselves as having a learning function. The function had always been rooted in accountability, and it was rooted in accountability in large part because there was a lack of trust. There was a lack of trust between boards and management about what was stated to be happening was actually happening. So the evaluators themselves have much more that they can do to deepen their role in knowledge management, producing more synthetic material based on experience, looking more deeply into the causal relationships that we believe exist but may not exist. Fourth point is for the evaluation departments to become more outward looking. It's quite striking that the difference between the techniques of evaluation as typically practiced inside these organizations and what is going on outside these organizations. There are evaluative techniques that are being used in the private sector, for example, or in other public organizations from which we could learn a great deal. We evaluators need to be more outward looking as a way of contributing to innovation inside the organization. There are many, many examples, and everyone in this room could say, where new projects are being designed with little more than a passing glance at the experience of other projects. And it feels to me that that's leaving a huge amount of value on the table. And the evaluation departments, I think, can assist the institutions and management to tap into that by ourselves being more rigorous about the need for good self-evaluation. There is immense value in the independent role of evaluations. It is not to be it's not to be trifled with. It must be protected. There's no question about that. However, I do think that there are times when the independence becomes a fetish, and when it prevents us from working in a more collegial and integrated way with project teams, with management, and importantly, with boards.
I think learning from each other has to be an imperative, and it somehow does not seem to happen as much as we like to talk about it. So the South-South dialogues and connecting the dots and wonderful phrases have come up, but honestly, the real learning is not happening.
In our idea, in planning stage, lesson learned could be used to identify risk and prepare for the countermeasures to be incorporated into the project formulation stage. And also in the plan doing stage, monitoring the risk and take countermeasures on daily processes. So for our idea, the risk management and lesson learned from the evaluation is unseparated one. It's equal. Thank you.
Let's go back to what evaluation is. You know, evaluation is about assessing the merit, worth, and value of things. Evaluators cannot escape the value dimension. And you know, evoking what we heard this morning from Ravi and others about inequality and inclusive growth, it seems to me that innovation, when we evaluate programs now from now on, we really need to give much more importance to the issues, the social issues.
I think that's part of what we strive to do as evaluators, is connect the finance piece to the wider effect that at the end of the day is actually the reason why these institutions exist. And if you can't tell that story, I think you're out of business, and probably you deserve to be out of business.
How can we evaluate creativity and innovation? Bringing in new technologies can also be very powerful, but the question of how to assess risk, that's really the art. And of course, the key question is, to what extent should evaluation encourage, responsible risk management rather than risk aversion? I would argue that this is a very important question for evaluators, to be sure that when we evaluate the performance of the institution, even if the project has failed, quote unquote, it may be an honorable failure, which we can learn a lot about.
A number of panelists spoke about IFAD and its evaluation system, and the fact that we have innovation as a dedicated criteria that we assess and we rate and assess in each and every evaluation. I think that is very important as a means to promoting innovation, because it keeps the management and the operations on their toes. We have also done 3 corporate level evaluations in the last decade on innovation. One of the major findings that our evaluations on innovations reveal is that, at least for IFAD, and it might hold true also for the Asian Bank and other multilaterals, and that is, innovation is very closely linked, in our opinion, to scaling up. Because as someone mentioned from the panel, innovation is only a means to an end, and the real test of a successful innovation is if it is scaled up by government, by private sector, by other donors, so that you can have a wider impact on poverty.
I want to mention very, very briefly is the impact of information technology on evaluation. That's where the innovation, the big innovation wave for evaluation will come over the next 20 years or so. I mean, you have Web 2, which is how social networking should impact on participatory evaluation, and Web 3, how big data is going to impact on evaluation.
It's always been a difficult relationship. And it's never going to be entirely smooth and easy. To some extent, a degree of tension is built in, and that's fine. But there are clearly cases where the tension becomes unproductive.
I'm keenly aware that although we report to the board, we have to have a relationship with management to bring about any change and have an influence on what and how this is going to happen. The way I started with my relationship was to ensure that the first few products that go to the president are almost concrete. Evidence is almost jumping at you when you look at these things. So in these cases, the first thing that I would ask my colleagues is, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, and now tell me what you think. That trust relationship starts to happen, and your president will believe you, and then start to take some actions.
There are many ways to resolve some of these tensions. Resort to external panels can be quite helpful, but mostly bringing in, instead of management evaluation tension, involving the client or involving the civil society in the whole debate. It is really quite important to get out of the fortress mentality that sometimes one gets into the multilateral development banks, and reach out both to involve the borrowers in the debate and involve the beneficiaries to the extent possible.
Evaluation is a shared responsibility between management and the evaluation department and the board. And all too often in these institutions, evaluation is seen as something that somebody else does. And when the truth is, in order for it to be done well, there needs to be shared responsibility across the institutions.
The purpose of the session was to talk about innovation, evaluation, see the links between the two, how one can promote, enhance, reinforce the other, or detract from it. and many, many issues were put on the table. The one or two that I take away, which particularly jumped out at me, were that one, evaluation should continue trying to do what it set out to do and what its role is, but that doesn't mean that it should be complacent and just continue doing business as usual. It should also seek to improve itself. Two points that were raised, which I thought particularly interesting and would warrant further discussion over coffee, I guess, are evaluation techniques could be learned from the private sector, and that evaluation departments need to be more outward-looking. The other important issue being relationship with management, boards, and evaluation departments, which I think all of us as evaluators experience on a daily basis. I think those are very important issues. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon.